All right. Hello and welcome to our No-Till Field Day 2022. My name is Justin Hargrove. I serve as the UT Extension Western Region Fisheries Agent. I also serve as the Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent in Benton County. Um, as the Regional Extension Fisheries Agent, I cover about 31 counties here in the western portion of Tennessee, answering questions that range anywhere from aquatic vegetation management to what do we need to do to grow good fish within our ponds. And so today we're going to be talking about growing trophy bass in our backyard ponds. Get lots and lots of questions about this, and looked at several ponds and seen various different scenarios that impact the growth and success of growing good fish in these ponds. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that today, and hopefully discussing a few things that you can take home that will be useful to you in managing your fishing operation as well. So the first thing that we need to think of is making sure that our pond is well suited to sport fishing in the first place. So if we've got an existing pond that we're trying to manage for fish, we want to make sure that we've got at least a half a surface acre of water to work with. That a way that we can ensure that we have a large enough environment to support a breeding and growing population of these sport fish. We want to make sure that we've got good water quality. We'll get into that a little bit later into the presentation. And we also want to make sure that we have the appropriate depth in these ponds. Got lots of people that whenever they dig ponds, they want to dig and have one that's 12, 14, 15 feet deep, but you can actually get into some fairly significant issues by digging your ponds too deep. We want to have an ideal depth of around 6 to 8 feet on the deeper portion of the pond to support these fish. We want to make sure that we keep our banks and the dam free of woody vegetation, and this is particularly important with the dam. If we've got willow trees or sweet gum or some of these less desirable species that are growing on the levee, we can wind up with the roots of those trees pushing through our compacted soil. It compromises the structural integrity of the soil, and later on that can lead to some catastrophic failures of our levee systems, which can drain the pond and cause some pretty severe issues. So the best way to avoid some of these leaks getting started in our ponds is to maintain our levees in a way that reduces the likelihood of trees and woody vegetation growing along those levees. So we really need to be serious about managing that. Another consideration to take is we want to have our shoreline steeply sloping with depths of 2.5 feet or better to reduce aquatic vegetation and algae growth. A lot of the ponds that I get calls to come out and look at that are struggling with aquatic vegetation, aquatic weeds, and filamentous algae, these start because the ponds do not have a deep enough shoreline. It's still pretty gradually sloping. That sunlight is able to penetrate the water column into the down to the bottom. And whenever we've got sunlight hitting that muddy soil at the bottom, we're going to wind up with quite a bit of germination out of some of these aquatic weeds, such as water primrose, filamentous algae, and several others. And we can reduce a lot of that just by ensuring that we keep those edges deep enough that the sun doesn't get in there and cause that stuff to start growing. Um, Clearly, we want to have a good, secure location for our pond. We want to be able to control who has access to it and when. That can keep you from having people coming in and fishing out all of your fish, but it can also keep your pond secure to where you don't have to worry about the liability of someone getting in there and falling in and injuring themselves and the impending lawsuit that would surely follow with that. We also want to make sure that we've got no conflicting issues with the property that we're putting the pond on or with the property that we're managing. We don't want to be building a dam somewhere where that water is going to back up onto our neighbor's place or anything of that nature, because that can cause some obvious problems as well. So a few things that we need to think about when we're trying to select the proper site for building a pond. We need to bear in mind when we're building this thing that we avoid shallow areas. We don't want anything less than 2.5 feet. We want to have those edges sloping pretty consistently. We also want to avoid excessive depth, and we'll get into why that's important later in this presentation. But by avoiding that excessive depth, we can actually reduce the likelihood of a depleted oxygen event and be a little bit more successful in keeping those fish alive. We need to think about what's going to be going into this watershed. What is our runoff coming from? So is this going to be some runoff from residential lawns? Is there potential septic or wastewater that's going to be winding up in this pond? Are we going to be having fertilizer running into this pond from agricultural fields, manure? These are the kinds of things that will immediately impact the quality of the water in your pond, and will have a big influence over how effectively we can manage these fish, as well as the phytoplankton blooms that serve as the base of the food chain for these fish. And we may want to consider putting in some buffer strips for these ponds. Those are areas of vegetation 15 to 20 foot wide that we allow tall grass to grow in to help and filter out some of the sediment or nutrients that may be washing in from the watershed. So as far as from a water quality management, we might want to consider liming these ponds if it's needed. This can be a fairly difficult chore after the pond has filled up. So if we're building a pond, we want to try to make sure and get that lime in before it starts filling up. In some situations, we may need to look at phosphorus reduction if we've got ponds that are filling in with quite a bit of organic matter, whether that be grass clippings, leaves, or things of that nature. Phosphorus will build up within that pond, and we can wind up with nutrient loading issues, and we would need to take steps to reduce that. Some options that we have available for reducing some of that would be things like a commercially available muckaway. It's a type of bacterium that can be put into the water that would help to eat away some of the decaying matter at the bottom of the pond. Other options might be floating gardens to uptake some of the excessive nutrients that we have growing in there as well. And then on the flip side of that, we may have ponds that are really nutrient poor, and we may need to utilize some aquatic fertilizers to get our nutrient levels back where we need them to be. And some ways that we can figure out whether we're nutrient rich or nutrient poor would be to take a soil sample of the mud at the basin of your pond. You could pull that out, dry it out, and send it off to our UT Soils Lab. We do have an option for soils test for ponds, and that would give you a chemical analysis of what your total nutrient level is within your pond. In other cases, we may need to consider what we can do to settle out some clay turbidity. If we've got ponds with suspended soil particulates in the water, what might be causing that? Do we have catfish in the pond? Do we have bullheads in there? Or was that pond newly constructed? And what can we do to take that out? A few options for that might be barley. We can spread bales of barley in there to help to attach to those soil particulates and help to settle them out. Other options might be as simple as ensuring that our watershed is really well sown with grass so that we don't have soil particulates that are eroding in there from the watershed. Other options we may want to consider would be pond aeration and water circulation. These are really important and beneficial options to have in a pond that is geared towards sport fishing, just as a insurance option to be able to help your fish pull through in the event of a natural oxygen depletion event. I get calls every spring and every fall of ponds that have turned over, and 99.9% of the times it is a naturally occurring oxygen depletion event, commonly referred to as a turnover. And we'll get into why those happen and how we can protect against them in just a moment. So if we've got a pond that is brand spanking new, we don't have any fish in there yet, we need to keep in mind that we want to get those ponds stocked properly. So if we're really looking at trying to manage these ponds for largemouth bass, we're going to be looking at stocking 75 to 100 bass fingerlings per acre. That's what everybody wants to get started with, but that should not be the first thing that you put into your brand new pond. What we really need to consider doing is stocking our pond in October with about 500 bluegill fingerlings per acre. Or if you would prefer, you can go with 400 bluegill fingerlings per acre along with 100 red ear sunfish. The red ear sunfish are an outstanding beneficial species to have in a pond, commonly referred to as shellcracker. They do eat the pond snails that we can wind up with, and those pond snails are actually a vector for the white grub parasite. So by having red ear sunfish in here, you can actually improve the overall health of your fishery by reducing the likelihood of those parasites becoming established because they do control the vector for those parasites. So in that case, we'd be looking at 400 bluegill per acre along with 100 red ear sunfish per acre. We would stock those in October, and then we would give them we would give them the rest of the year to get settled and to establish and start breeding. And then we would add the bass in the following spring around the later part of May at a rate of 75 to 100 fingerlings per acre. We have a lot of folks that like to add in channel catfish, and these can be added in with your bass and bluegill. Um, we're going to be looking at 50 to 75 fingerlings per acre. Bear in mind that channel catfish very rarely will reproduce in a pond setting. So if we put in 75 of those channel catfish and within another 3 or 4 years we catch out uh, we catch out 75 of them, we know that we're going to need to restock it. I get a lot of questions about putting crappie in ponds. I really advise against it. Crappie are the detriment to a lot of ponds here in our region. And the reason for that is that they are very voracious predators. They have a very high reproduction rate. And over time, if we've got crappie stocked in ponds, it's a matter of time before they wind up eating the vast majority of our bait fish out of there and outcompeting our largemouth bass, resulting in a pond that is filled with stunted crappie. Now, an example as to why they are so problematic, black crappie and white crappie both will spawn earlier than bass will. So their larvae are going to hatch out and become fingerlings quicker than the bass will. And then their larvae and fingerlings are going to begin eating the baby bass. Black crappie reproduce at a rate of anywhere from 11,000 to 180,000 eggs per female. White crappie are from 2,900 up to about 91,000 eggs per female, whereas bass on the top end are only going to be producing 45,000 eggs per female. So these crappie are laying eggs well before the bass are, and then they're laying lots more eggs, 2 to 3 times more eggs than what those bass are. And they will outcompete our bass in most every circumstance. So I do not recommend stocking crappie in anything less than 50 acres. And that's not just my recommendation, that's also backed by Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency as well. So if we're talking about ponds that already have fish existing in them, then that's going to change up the way that we manage those ponds. Really, we're going to need to be keeping catch records. And so we've got an example here of what a catch record might look like. This is just a generic one that I pulled offline, but we want to be keeping up with when we're catching these fish, what the species is, how many of them there are, and then total weight and total length are very important. By recording weights and lengths and keeping up with those, we can plug those numbers in and compare them with what we know a healthy fish of the same length to be and calculate a relative weight. And then that relative weight gives us something to go on as to whether or not we might be overpopulated, underpopulated, or if there's an issue that might be existing. If we're not keeping up with catch records, the only way to know exactly what we've got in that pond and whether or not those fish are healthy and that the ratios are in balance would be to perform an electrofishing survey. That is a service that UT Extension offers. I do have a shock boat and can come out to your place and we can shock those ponds to see what is in them. And then I will calculate relative weight of the samples that we catch. And I'll also compare the ratios of predatory fish to bait fish, as well as if we've got any kind of non-native invasive species that might be present. And from there, we'll come up with a management plan. That does carry a fee with it, but it is a way to be able to figure out what we have going on in our existing fish ponds and where to go from there. And so if we've been keeping up with catch records or if we've done an electrofishing survey, from that, if there's any kind of a problem fish, whether that be bullheads, green sunfish, anything of that nature. We want to try to remove the problem species, and then we want to harvest the beneficial species at a level that would be sustainable to prevent them from overpopulating, but we also need to be cautious not to overharvest as well. So with an electrofishing survey, as I mentioned, we would be pulling a representative sample of the species that are present in the pond. We would measure those fish and collect relative weight data. We would assess the balances, and then we would be setting some management guidelines for that pond going into the future. Here we've got pictured our shock boat. I was actually in Wayne County on this particular day for a fisheries demonstration. And this is pretty well the way that it goes. We drop the anodes into the water. I assess the water quality based on total conductivity, and then from there we're going to start running electricity and shocking some fish up. Get a lot of questions from folks whether or not this actually kills the fish. It does not. We're not running high enough levels of electricity in most cases to kill them. We're simply stunning them, causing their swim bladders to get out of balance. They'll float to the top, and we'll scoop them up and assess them at that time. And so as far as problem species that we can wind up in our ponds, we've got pictured here green sunfish, bullhead catfish, various species of shad, warmouth bass, golden shiner. The reason that these fish tend to be problematic, the bullhead catfish, they filter feed, they get on the bottom, sort through mud, and they will keep a pond pretty muddy in most cases. And they also seldom ever grow large enough to be considered an enjoyable fish to go after. With our shad, they can reproduce at extremely high levels. They also chiefly eat phytoplankton, and if we've got these in the pond, they can eat through enough phytoplankton to start causing some problems with our zooplankton, which will in turn create problems for our bluegill and baby bass. And then we've also got white crappie and black crappie. We've already discussed some of the issues with them. I love them. They're my favorite fish to eat, but they are not what you want in a pond setting. So as far as harvesting fish, I know we've got a lot of folks out here that like to catch and release, and that is perfectly fine on a large reservoir such as Kentucky Lake or Reelfoot. But if we are in a small pond, 2 to 3 acres, or even a large pond, we've got to harvest these fish. The thing that we've got to keep in mind is that each pond has a carrying capacity. It can only support so many pounds of fish per acre. Once we reach that carrying capacity, you're going to be really hard pressed to get those fish to grow any larger than what they are. Oftentimes, I'll find ponds that are absolutely just chock full of 8 to 12-inch bass, and whenever I discuss it with the owner, we find out that they haven't been harvesting those fish. They're just catching them and then throwing them back in. It's kind of like fitting people into a phone booth. You can only fit so many people into a phone booth before it becomes way overcrowded. Same thing goes with these ponds. So if we're talking about an unfertilized pond, which is your common run-of-the-mill pond in West Tennessee, a 1 acre pond is going to support about 100 pounds of fish. If we're fertilizing those ponds, a 1 acre pond can support about 400 pounds of fish. But the thing to keep in mind with fertilizing ponds is that if we're fertilizing those ponds, we're going to be adding an aquatic fertilizer every month. We want to fertilize it every month. And if you stop putting that fertilizer in, that's going to cause that phytoplankton to shut down. And that's essentially like building up a great population and then taking all their food away. And you can wind up with some pretty bad circumstances in that case. So if we're thinking about fertilizing our ponds, we're going to have to remove 4 times as many fish in order for them to remain stable. And we're going to have to put that fertilizer in there every single month continuously in order to support that artificially inflated population. So unless you are looking to really push your ponds and you're going to be managing it day in and day out and are committed, I would recommend not fertilizing your ponds, because a lot of our ponds around here, they're already getting some fertilized runoff from the surrounding landscapes, whether it be residential lawns, pastures, or agricultural row crop ground. they're already getting some additional nutrients into them to help support those phytoplankton blooms. And so with that, we've got to consider we've got to consider annual harvest rate or monthly harvest rate in order to keep these ponds in balance. So what we need to think about for bass is that if we've got a pond that is already in balance, we want to be taking out at least 12 pounds of bass per acre per year. If we're looking at bluegill, we want to be taking out about 36 pounds of bluegill per acre per year. Once again, we stocked our bluegill at a rate much higher than our bass. And that's because that is our forage species. We want 3 to 5 pounds of bluegill to every 1 pound of bass in our pond in order to support that bass population and allow it to grow. We want to try to maintain that ratio over time, but those bluegill will outproduce the bass by leaps and bounds. And so with that being the case, we will need to remove those bluegill each year, just like we do with the bass. So as I like to tell folks, hot grease in a fish fry is a fantastic tool to be utilized whenever we're trying to manage these populations in our ponds. Also, if you're not into cooking those fish and cleaning them, those raccoons have got to eat too. They'll appreciate you throwing them over the levee. So we get questions about supplemental feeding. What do we need to do about supplementing these fish? Can I feed them extra that would help them grow? And that's absolutely something that can be done every year that will benefit those fish, those bass in particular. Even with a pond that is well balanced with bass and bluegill, we can still add about 8 pounds of fathead minnows per acre per year, and that's going to just provide extra forage. It's just going to be more of a buffet for those bass to eat on. The thing to keep in mind is that those minnows in many cases are not going to survive long enough to reproduce. So it will be something that you're going to be looking at stocking annually. But 8 pounds of flatheads or of fatheads per acre works out really good, allows those bass to be able to grow a little bit quicker, and it'll also take a little bit of pressure off of those bluegill. And it's a good time to do that after they've spawned so that it can take some pressure off of them and some of those fingerlings that are hatching out. As far as for feeding bluegill and red ear or channel catfish, just a commercially available floating fish feed will do wonders for them. Channel catfish in particular, they are extremely feed efficient. For every 2 pounds of feed that you throw out there, you're going to be getting about a pound of catfish gain. Um, just bear in mind, we don't want to overfeed these fish. We want to throw out just enough floating fish feed that they can clean it up within 5 minutes. Anything left after 5 minutes, for the most part, it's going to dissolve and just kind of drift down to the bottom, and that's going to create somewhat of a nutrient loading effect and an expensive nutrient loading effect at that. So we don't want to overfeed. So we talked a little bit about lime and fertilizer and which one is going to be the most beneficial to you in most circumstances. The one that I generally recommend to folks is going to be lime. And whenever we're talking about liming ponds, we're talking about agricultural limestone. Certainly do not want to use hydrated lime. We can wind up killing fish if we utilize hydrated lime. It gets active way too quickly. But by applying some agricultural limestone to our ponds, we can get that alkalinity where we want it. That alkalinity is going to stay where we want it for quite some time. But the problem with it is that it is difficult to apply once that pond has filled up. Agricultural limestone is something that we apply by the ton. Oftentimes we're going to be looking at 2 or 3 tons per acre whenever we're talking about ponds. And I've not met a spreader truck yet that can walk on water. So that makes things difficult. The thing that we can do for ponds that are full is that we can get with a commercial pond management company. There are a few here in West Tennessee that spread limestone on ponds with a pond barge. Essentially, it's a boat that's got a big flat deck on the front of it, and they'll put several 100 pounds of lime on the front at a time, and then they'll blast it off with a sump pump that they've got in the pond behind the boat. It's a messy process. It can get expensive, but between the two, in many cases, I would consider lime to be the better option. Now, fertilizer does have its place. This is something that we can use to increase nutrients for larger phytoplankton bloom. As I mentioned, that is the base of our food chain. Without phytoplankton, everything else fails. It can increase the food source for the fish by increasing phytoplankton. We increase zooplankton. By increasing zooplankton, we increase what those larval fish and fingerlings are eating. So it helps us out on that. But it also increases management requirements, it increases expense, and it increases risk. The trouble that we get into with fertilizers, I mentioned before, we've got to put it out every month. So that increases expense and management requirements. And it is somewhat risky because if we wind up with too much phytoplankton in this pond, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And the reason for that is if we've got a really great phytoplankton bloom, that stuff's producing oxygen during the daytime. But if we wind up with a cool spell and cloudy days, that phytoplankton bloom can shut off, it'll die. And then all of those microscopic phytoplanktons by the trillions are going to use up the oxygen in the water column, release carbon dioxide, and we can wind up with an oxygen depletion event. So if we're going to be fertilizing ponds, I would strongly recommend to have some aerators in those ponds just to provide you with an insurance policy in the event of a depleted oxygen event. So this goes back to our agricultural limestone, why it is beneficial to us from a fisheries management standpoint. Um, a lot of people like to talk about pH in our waters. The thing about pH, that's we've got pH represented by these lines here. pH fluctuates throughout the day, whether that's in high alkaline waters or low alkaline waters. But the thing is, with low alkalinity, that pH can fluctuate very widely throughout the day. And so as it fluctuates, it's taking a toll on those fish. They're like me and you. They like to be in a stable and constant environment. And if we've got big, wide swings in pH levels every day, they're going to be burning a lot of calories and having to fight that to stay alive. And so it's not going to be conducive to them relaxing, eating, and growing well. Now, if we've got higher alkaline waters, then our pH is going to stabilize throughout the day. We're not going to see these big swings that we do in low alkalinity, and that's going to allow us to be able to grow bigger and better fish because they're going to be under much less stress. So that is where alkalinity really plays in to being able to grow bigger fish, healthier fish, and happier fish as well. We want to be able to stabilize those pH levels so that those fish can stabilize and focus on growing instead of just trying to stay alive. So with fertilizing ponds, this is what we are really hoping to wind up with, this picture of this pond right here. We really want those nice pea green colorations to where we can't see very deeply through the water column because we've got so much phytoplankton blooming. The thing of it is, here in West Tennessee, as I've mentioned before, we wind up with quite a bit of nutrient high runoff getting into our ponds anyway. And if we're not managing these ponds properly, adding more nutrients can really cause some pretty severe aquatic weed problems. It can cause problems with when that phytoplankton bloom shuts down and sucks up all of our oxygen. We can have a turnover and have dead fish floating out there in the morning. So in most cases, I'm not going to recommend folks to fertilize their pond unless they're going to be really, really committed to doing it monthly, to managing the weeds, to removing those higher numbers of fish each year in order to keep it from getting overpopulated, and getting those aeration units out there to protect against that phytoplankton if it does in fact shut off, as it oftentimes does in the spring and fall. So why do we want to aerate these ponds? We've already talked a little bit about what can happen whenever we get into an oxygen depletion event. As it says on the slide, plants, microbes, fish, and ponds, oftentimes we can wind up consuming more oxygen than what we've actually got in the pond. And sometimes we wind up with these naturally occurring fish kills. Most oftentimes it's going to look really bad, it's going to smell really bad, but it's not going to kill everything in the pond. But it still can set us back from a management standpoint. So by putting these aeration units in a pond, we can prevent this from happening, or at the very least, reduce the impact of one of these events. We also talk a little bit about lake turnovers. And so this is a commonly occurring phenomenon that happens throughout the year, every year. During the summertime, we wind up with a nice warm layer of water up here towards the top. Then we've got the thermocline um, a few feet down. Any of you that's ever swam in the river before in the summertime, you know, at 4 or 5 feet, you hit that, you know, really, really cool water versus the 80-degree stuff up towards the top. And then down at the bottom, we've got this hypomelion, which is basically completely anoxic. This is much worse in our really, really deep ponds. The deeper our ponds are, the more opportunity that they have to stratify like this. And so that's why I like to advise folks to shoot for those ponds that are about 8 foot in depth, because anything past that, we have the opportunity to stratify. And the deeper they are, the more that we're going to have in the hypomelion zone. And we would like to try to avoid that. In the fall of the year, we start having these cool rains that wash into our ponds. The cool rains come in and cause that water to mix and turn over as it shows in the illustration. Same thing happens in the springtime. Our water gets cold in the winter. We get warmer rains in the springtime that cause all of that to mix, and we can wind up with a turnover. And that's why we oftentimes see these fish die-offs in the springtime and in the fall as a result of that anoxic water down toward the bottom mixing with the rest of the water and causing a oxygen depletion event, along with some of our other factors such as phytoplankton die-off. And so to avoid these kinds of issues, you can put in what's known as a diffuser. Diffusers can be sunk in the deeper portion of the ponds, and those simply circulate the water throughout the year. That's something that you run pretty well full time. Whereas with an aeration unit, they are putting in oxygen. The diffusers aren't really putting in oxygen, they're just circulating the water. Aeration units, on the other hand, put oxygen into the water column. They're going to be surface level things that oxygenate towards the surface of the pond. And those we want to run at night. Our oxygen depletion events typically occur overnight. Our oxygen levels lowest usually around 4 or 5 in the morning. So you can actually get aerators with a timer on them, turn them on around 10 o'clock at night, turn them off around 9 o'clock in the morning, and that should help to pull you through any of those depletion events. So we've got lots of resources available for y'all. First and foremost would probably be your county extension agent. Most all of your county extension agents have had at least some training in fisheries management. If you've got a question for them that they don't know the answer to, they'll get you in touch with me, and I'd be happy to come out and meet with you, speak with you over the phone, anything I can do to assist. I also mentioned relative weight. We've got a link here for a relative weight calculator. It's one of the few things that I'll recommend to you that came from Alabama, but it is pretty doggone handy. And so this would be the website that you would go to for it. And then another fantastic resource that I use a lot is the Texas A&M Fisheries and Pond Management website. They have got a tremendous bank of information there. It's user friendly. It's available to the public, and it's lots and lots of great information from land grant universities and research centers all across the southeastern United States. If you've got an issue, they've probably got a publication that would be pertinent to it. So I would certainly recommend checking out Texas A&M's fisheries website. So with that being said, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in to our ponds and fisheries management discussion today. Once again, my name is Justin Hargrove. If I can ever be of any help to you, please feel free to reach out to me or reach out to your county agents. We would be happy to help you any way that we can, and happy fishing.